Hello everybody, this is Nate from Team Chaos, and in this tutorial we're going to be taking a look at how you can create a couple of different glass materials. First up, we're going to create a basic glass material, and then we're going to turn that basic glass material into a tinted glass material by playing with the fog color parameter. Then that glass is going to look too pristine for us, and we're going to fling some mud at it basically. Now, mud's a little hardcore, so then we're going to tone it down and we're going to replace the mud with some fingerprint imperfections, okay? Now, after we're done with the fingerprint imperfections, we're going to get our basic glass material back in and we're going to pour some juice into our glass. So yeah, all the glass material that you've seen in this little animation, well, those are the glass materials that we're going to learn how to create here, on top of showing you how you can create a basic liquid sort of mesh that can fit inside a glass that we're gonna, use as that juice base. All right, so with the intro sort of done here, let's go to work. Okay, so the first thing that we're gonna do here is we're obviously gonna want to create a new V-Ray material because we obviously need that, right? Then let's go to a more descriptive name. Let's call it the glass material. We're going to apply it to our glass model, and then we can go inside this material and, well, start tweaking things. First thing, reflections. We want this material to be reflective, so we're going to turn that reflection color to all the way to white, so we have those reflections working at their full strength, okay? Now, at this point, I will nitpick just a little bit. I'm going to lower the glossiness down to 0.99. You can keep it at 1. That's going to create that perfectly pristine glass material. That's most certainly one of the ways to go about it, but I'm just going to lower it down to 0.99 here, okay? With that done, I'm going to go under the refraction tab because we obviously want to make this material be refractive, right? Because glass is refractive, it lets light pass through it. So for the color here, we're just going to set it to full on white, and then we're also going to lower that refraction glossiness down to 0.99, just the same as we did with the reflections, all right? Okay, at this point, there's just one more thing that we kind of need to tweak, and that is the diffuse color. So glass materials typically don't have a diffuse component to them, so you just want to lower that diffuse color. Well, lower it. You just want to make it, turn it to black, basically. Okay, you want to make it black. And so with that, we're pretty much done with our basic glass material. Now, as you probably remember from the intro animation, the next thing that we're going to tackle here is going to be turning this basic glass material into a tinted glass material. Okay, so to get our colored glass going, we're going to have to focus on the translucency settings for our glass material here. So first up is the translucency type. You want this to be set correctly. You don't want it to be set to subsurface scattering. That's great for marble, it's great for skin, but it's not really great for glass because it kind of works with the more opaque materials. Then for the volumetric translucency type, well, then you want to use that one when you want the light to enter your material and scatter inside it. So that's not typically what happens with glass materials. So we're just going to go with a translucency type of none here, okay? Right. So next thing we're going to focus on is the fog color. Okay, so we're just gonna paste a bit of a color that we've pre-prepared here, and as soon as we do that, you're going to be able to see that now our glass here looks colored, right? So if we break down what's happening here is that with the fog color, you're essentially setting the absorption color for this material. Or if we phrase it a little bit differently, all the other colors but this one are going to get absorbed, okay? And it's very tightly connected to this depth parameter. So the fog color and the depth parameter are connected, and how this works is basically when your light ray hits your glass material, it will then travel through it, right? And when it travels for 1 centimeter, because we've set it to 1 centimeter here, right? Then at that point, at 1 centimeter, it's going to have this color to it, okay? So if we up the depth, for example, to 10 or thereabouts, right? As you can see, because this glass object is not thick enough, well, then the light is going to hit it. It's going to travel through it, and then at 9.48 centimeters, it would have this color. But because this glass is not thick enough, well, then it's just going to look mainly colorless, okay? So that's how these parameters here work. Now, we kind of liked that being set to 1, and so we can just go with it, okay? But that's the principle for when it comes to creating colored glass materials: the fog color and then also the depth. One thing to note here is that with the fog color, if you set this to, say, for example, this pure, well, let's go with pure black color. Well, then now you're essentially saying that at 1 centimeter, okay, all of the light's going to get completely absorbed because this is a totally dark color. Or if we go with 10%, right, you're going to be able to see that a lot of that light gets absorbed, right? So at 10% here, when the ray travels for 1 centimeter, it will mostly just, you know, get absorbed, and you get this, you know, very dark color going on. Okay, so color for your fog color here, well, not color, but the value for your fog color here does matter. All right. Right. So this is looking pretty cool, but it's looking just a little bit too pristine. So the next thing that we're gonna sort of learn how to do here is fling mud at our glass. All right, so the first thing that we're gonna do here is we're just gonna bring in a new surface node here. It's going to be the blend surface node. All right, so the thinking here is going to be that we want this glass material to be our base material, okay? And then on top of it, we want to blend a totally unique dirt material, and that's why we need the blend surface node here. Okay, now to set all this up here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this material node all the way to the right here, and I'm going to plug my glass material into the base material slot of my blend node, and then the entire blend node I'm going to plug into the materials BRDF sort of input field there. Okay, so this way you're basically saying that this blend node is what's driving this material. Okay, now the next move here should probably be to bring in another surface node, and this is going to be the V-Ray material surface node. So this is going to be our dirt material. Okay, and we can just plug it into the layer 1 coat material slot here. Okay, so now this material here is sitting on top of the glass material, right? And as you can see, that's exactly what's happening. But you know, obviously we don't want our dirt material to just be completely uniformly overriding or sitting on top of our glass material, because this is really not looking like glass anymore, right? Instead, what we want to do is we want to bring in a mask so that we have areas where this material is, well, where there's dirt, and then areas where there's no dirt at all. Okay, so that's the setup we want to go with here. And to do that, we're going to have to bring in a mask. Okay, so I'm just going to drag a bitmap in here. It's a bitmap like this, as you can see. Okay. And what I can do here with it is I can just plug it into the blend amount slot in that layer 1, okay, in my blend surface node. So as you can see, that's already getting us closer to where we want to be. So there's parts here where, you know, glass kind of looks more like glass, and there's other parts here where, you know, we're mainly seeing that dirt material. But the contrast here just isn't enough for me, okay, because this still looks like a super dirty glass material. So my next move here is going to be to bring in a color correction node. I'm just going to drop it on top of this connection, which is going to put the color correction node sort of in between for me automatically, okay? And then I'm just going to tweak the brightness a little bit and the contrast. Now, we obviously pre-rehearsed this tutorial, so we know which values are going to work for us here. And the main idea here, or one thing that you should be mindful of here, is that when you take a look at the your mask itself, okay, if you don't have these white parts here clipping, okay, so when they're not totally completely white, well then you're going to be basically doing a simple blend between these two materials. Okay, so if these were totally sort of 50% gray, well then the end result would look like 50% of this glass material mixed with 50% of this dirt material. Which might be something that you want in certain situations, but if you just want this dirt material to be this totally unique dirt material and it's really thick or whatever, well, not really thick, but it's definitely opaque, okay? If you want that, you want to make sure that this mask is super contrasting. You have these white parts here where you're letting that dirt material through. You want these parts to be fully white, essentially, okay? Now, one thing that you might have noticed here is that the mask that we've set up here is not really fully black and white. There are quite a few of those gray values in between. Now, sometimes you want that, other times you don't want that. In our case here, we're leaving some of those grays in there because we're just treating those areas like, you know, like there is mud there, but it's not really generously applied, right? So maybe it's just a thin strip of that mud material there, which means it's maybe even partially see-through, right? And so when your mask is sort of gray, right? Well, if it's perfectly gray, then you're mixing 50% of that glass material with 50% of that mud material. And in this case, you know, that's not going to be that full, thick, sort of muddy looking material, but it's going to be something in between. And sometimes that's that kind of fall off that you want if something got smeared or something, right? Now, there are certainly areas where our mask is fully white, and those are the areas where we're just seeing that sort of mud material in its full glory, and we don't see any of that glass material underneath it. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so with this setup, I think this looks good enough for all intents and purposes, but now we do still need to set up our dirt material. So we're just going to start dragging in more nodes here. Okay, so this is a bitmap, this sort of dirt looking material. I'm going to plug it into the diffuse color slot of that dirt material. Okay, that's going to give our dirt some color, as you can see. And so this is already starting to look like something. Next up, maybe if we go under reflections here, we can turn those reflections up. And we could also bring in, well, a roughness map for this dirt material. So I'm just going to plug it into the glossiness slot, but then, because this is a roughness map, okay, I'm going to go into reflections here. I'm going to take this use roughness to on. Okay. What else could we do here? For a bit more realism, what we could do is we could drag in a normal map. Okay, so we want this dirt to be a little bit bumpy looking. Okay, now to set up a normal map, you need that normal map, well, shader or node, if you will. You can plug the normal map into it, and then the entire setup into the bump map slot of your dirt material. Map type here should be set to normal map in tangent space. And this way, you know, we've added some bumpiness to our dirt. We could still play with the multiplier, but for all intents and purposes, you probably kind of already guess, or you kind of already see how things work. And you being a creative, you can now go ahead and you can tweak all these values to your heart's content, obviously. Now, one thing that still kind of sort of irks me with our setup here is that the glass is dirty both on the outside as well as on the inside. So in this case, it is really not recommended to drink anything from this glass. But maybe if we just cleaned the glass on the inside, well, then maybe somebody could drink from it. So what we're going to do next year is we're going to tweak our setup so that the glass is just dirty on the outside, but is clean on the inside. Okay, so the way we're going to approach this here is we're just going to select our glass object. Okay, we're going to go into the edge mode, and we're going to select, sort of this loop, kind of like this. Okay, so just select one of the loops that is going to be, well, your the line between the outer part and the inner part of the glass. Then go under the select menu, and you can use the fill selection tool to just select each ever of the sides that you want. And we want the outer side, so we're going to select the outer side. And as you can see, right now we've selected the outer part of the glass. With this selection, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Shift C on my keyboard, which is going to bring up the commander, and then I'm going to search for a vertex map tag. I'm gonna double click on it, which is going to add it to our glass object. And now with this selection selected, and the opacity here set to 100%, I'm going to hit apply selected. They're just going to create a vertex map for us, which, you know, is going to have opacity at 100% for these, for this outer part selection that we've made. Okay, so now what we can do is we can name this vertex map a little bit more descriptively. So outer part, yeah, we can just call it the outer part. And next, we can bring in a vertex color node, okay, just like this. Into the vertex color, we can drag our vertex map that we've created, okay, just like this. And then we can plug this entire thing into the blend amount slot in our blend material. But now the end result's really not going to look good, because now we're basically saying that the glass part is on the inside, right? And the outer part is just this dirt material, which is not exactly what we want. We still want to retain that mask, right? So the way that we can set this up is we can leave the vertex color where it is. Okay, so basically now we're just saying we're applying this dirt material on the outer parts, okay, and not the inner parts. And then we're going to take this mask that we've set up earlier, and we're just going to plug it into the opacity color slot in our material, in our dirt material. Okay, so just like that, and there we go. That's how you do that. Now, the workflow that we just showcased here is obviously very dependent on your vertex maps. And this workflow works both whether you're using a V-Ray GPU or whether you're using just the standard V-Ray renderer. But now, if you're not using V-Ray GPU, there is another workflow that you can try out that might be just a little bit more straightforward to you. And so that's what we're going to be taking a look at next here. Now, before we start showcasing the other workflow, so to speak, just as a note, right, the workflow that you've seen with the V-Ray GPU that we just showcased works with V-Ray as well, so the non-V-Ray GPU version. It works fine. If you like it, you can use it. It's a great workflow, right? But with V-Ray, so the non-GPU version, you just have this extra workflow that you can use if you prefer it, and that's the one that we're going to showcase right now. Okay. Before we do that, we're just gonna do some things here to better illustrate, well, to prepare everything to demo that workflow. So first up, we're just gonna delete this blend node here, and then we're just gonna copy this entire dirt setup that we've created. Okay, we're gonna copy it, and then we're gonna delete it. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a new V-Ray node material, and we're gonna call it the dirt material. We're going to delete this default V-Ray material that's already spawned in here, and we're going to paste our V-Ray dirt material, okay, in here. We're going to connect it to the material BRDF, and there we go. Okay, so right now you can imagine that when we approach creating this dirt material, we didn't create it inside this glass node structure, if you will, but we created it as a separate material. Okay, so this is that material now. So now what we can do is, we can kind of do the same thing that we did before. We select this inner, well, not inner, but we select this edge here, okay? And we go and we use the fill selection tool to select the outer part of the glass then, okay? But then what we do is we can hit Shift C on our keyboard, and we can start typing in store selection. Okay, and we hit enter. That's going to create this selection tag, and if you double click on the selection tag, you're going to see that inside of it is this selection stored, the selection that we've created just a second ago, right? So now what we can do is we can apply this dirt material on top of our class object, and inside its selection constraint field here, we can drag in our selection tag, our polygon selection. So what's happening right now is that this dirt material is, it's being applied to the outer part of this object, and on the inner part we have this glass material, and it's kind of hard to see from this angle, but that's what's happening. Obviously what we're getting here is not exactly what we want, because we want to mask out certain parts of this dirt material, so certain parts are clean glass and other parts are, well, just dirty. So to do that, we're going to take our mask, okay. You can take your mask and you can just plug it into the opacity color slot of your dirt material. Then you're going to get this really weird looking result here. What you ought to do now is you have to select your dirt material tag here, and you check this, you make sure that this add material toggle is checked to on. Okay, and now you're getting that proper result going. Okay, and so this is just another way of doing the same thing. Okay, and so you can use which one you prefer. You can go the vertex map style workflow. You can use that, or you can use this one with separate materials. This one adheres a little bit more to that classical Cinema 4D workflow, where you can kind of have all these material tags sitting on top of each other, and you can sort of mask between them, right? Using masks that are plugged into their respective materials. So it depends on whichever workflow you prefer, really. And so if you're using V-Ray, so not the GPU version, you just have this extra workflow that you can use if you prefer it. All right, so with that workflow explored, let's move on to sort of swapping our mud imperfections with fingerprint imperfections. All right, so the way we're going to approach this here is we're just going to take our glass material. So that's the one where we're using the blend node and we're blending the dirt on top of that, you know, clean glass material. We're going to go inside this node material and we're just going to select all of those nodes that make up that dirt material and we're going to hit delete. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to bring in a new V-Ray material node and we're going to plug this in on top there, right, as that coat material. Okay, so next up, we're going to bring in an imperfection texture, and this is going to be a fingerprint imperfection texture, okay? And just in case you're interested in seeing it a little bit more full screen style, so a little bit more up close, well, here it is. Now, yes, you could argue that this is not necessarily a fingerprint imperfection map. It's more like a smudge imperfection map. But, you know, if you were to take your fingerprints and smudge them, this is probably how they would look like. So for all intents and purposes, we're going to call this a fingerprint imperfection map, although you could also, you know, probably also just call it a basic smudge imperfection map as well. Now, if you look a little bit more up closely, you're also going to be able to notice that there are little specks of dust in there. We're not going to worry about those. We're trying to recreate greasy fingerprints here. Those technically are not, but we're not going to get that up close to our glass material. So we're just, you know, it's going to work just well for us here. Okay, so then what we're going to do here is we're going to use this imperfection map here as an opacity map. But as it currently stands, if we maybe just plug this into the opacity slot here, as it currently stands, you're going to be able to see that, you know, the contrast here on this texture is not quite as high, because as you can see, these parts here that should probably be relatively clean of those fingerprints, they're still affected, right, by this material. That's because this opacity map isn't quite as punchy. So to adjust that, we're going to bring in a remap node, and we're just gonna set it up like this. And now we're going to play with this spline here. This is going to be really useful. We're just going to come up with a setup that's going to, well, that's going to look a lot punchier. And as you can see right away, right, we have that clean material coming through here, basically at 100%. And then here we have these fingerprints coming through, right? So that's exactly what we want here. So it's just something a little bit punchier for our opacity map. Now, just in case you're wondering, the same sort of principles apply here as they did with the way that we mask our mud imperfections on top of our glass. So maybe you want a bit of a fall off to your mask, so areas that are a little bit more grayish rather than fully white or fully black, because that way you're creating that natural sort of looking transition between that greasy material and, you know, just that clean, pristine glass material. So maybe parts of your mask are fully white. That's where the grease material is very apparent. And then maybe there are areas where, you know, the mask is a little bit more grayish, and that's where those are the areas on the glass where those fingerprint imperfections kind of smeared off already a little bit. Okay. So in our case, what we're first going to do with this material here is we're just going to lower its diffuse component down to 0, because we're creating those greasy fingerprints without a lot of dust particles in them, essentially. Okay. Then we're going to go under reflections here, and we're going to, you know, turn those to 100%. We're going to effectively fully enable them. And because these fingerprints are at least a little bit imperfect, right, we're just going to lower the glossiness down to 0.8 or thereabout. So just so you know, there are still some imperfections in these fingerprints, so still some microparticles in there. Okay, then we're going to go under refraction here. We're going to make the fingerprints be fully refractive. We could actually go with a value that's lower, but I think this is going to look pretty great at 100%. For the refraction glossiness, we're going to set that to 0.8 as well, so that it's matching the reflections. That's sort of the physical approach to it, although you can experiment with different values here, of course. And then for the refraction IOR, well, we're just going to go with, I guess, 1.4. If you know the IOR of grease or whatever material you're trying to recreate, then obviously you want to go with that. That's going to net you the most realistic result. But as you can see right here, the end result that we're getting just with these settings is looking pretty darn cool. Now, before we conclude this section with the fingerprint imperfections and all that, there are a couple of things that we would like to emphasize still. Okay, so first up, there's a lot of different ways to get to the same result. Okay, the workflow that we showcased here with the base material and the layered material, that is, in my opinion at least, the most flexible workflow, because what it allows you to do is to basically exchange that layered material, so that imperfection material, with anything that you would like, really. So in our case here, we've used, we've created this grease imperfection material, and those were our fingerprint imperfections then. But imagine this, what if you had a sweaty hand, right? And you touched a really dusty surface, and then you touched the glass. Well then, that greasy material wouldn't be that pure sort of sweat-like grease material, but instead it would probably have some dust in it, right? So some sweat and some dust, and so that layered material that you would be creating then would probably not be fully refractive potentially, and it would also probably have a diffuse component to it as well. So that's something that you should keep in mind when you're creating these types of imperfections. There are multiple kinds of imperfections, and with the workflow that we showcased here, creating them is a little bit more straightforward, because all you have to worry about is just that layered material and how that sort of masks on top of your glass, right? Right, so pretty versatile workflow. Now, we did mention there are multiple ways to approach doing the same thing. So if, for example, you're just trying to create greasy fingerprint imperfections, instead of going through everything that we showcased here through this admittedly flexible workflow, what you could also do to get a very similar effect is you could just turn on the coat layer in your V-Ray material and make that a little bit more rougher looking. Because if you think about it, what is a greasy material, right? It's just another very thin, refractive and reflective layer, right? And that's exactly what the coat sort of layer is, right? So you can just turn that on, put a mask in there, and that's sort of how you can create those greasy fingerprint imperfections a little bit more quickly. But obviously, this workflow isn't quite as flexible, right? Now, there's another workflow. What you can also do is you can use decal objects, right? So you can create any kind of a material, apply it to the decal, point the decal at your glass object or whatever surface you're working on, right? And that's another way that you can create these sort of fingerprint imperfections if we're talking about glass materials and such, right? So hopefully what's getting through here is that, you know, there's multiple different ways of doing the same thing, but then also there's multiple different kinds of fingerprint imperfections that you can create, right? So really, it's all about you being creative. All right, now before we start concluding this tutorial, we have one more sort of workflow that we want to showcase to you, and that is how you can put juice in your glass and how you can set all that up real easily, real quickly. Now, before we actually go in when we set up our juice, just a bit of a note, we replaced that colored glass material with this basic glass material just because we think that's going to look a little bit nicer. Okay, totally a subjective thing, and that's the only thing that we've changed here. Okay, so step number one for us here is going to be to come up with that juice geometry. So to do that, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to select my glass object. I'm going to go into the edge mode, and then I'm going to select my loop selection tool, and I'm going to, you know, pick one of these loops on the inside, I guess sorta, kind of like this. Okay, then I'm going to go under the select menu. I'm going to use the fill selection tool to select that inner part. Okay. Let's see. Next up, what we should do here is we should split this geometry off into its own object, and we can give this a more descriptive name. So let's call it the juice object, juice mesh, you know, and then let's solo this thing, because what we want to do next here is we want to close the top here, obviously. So to do that, we're just going to leverage the close polygon hole command. And you know what, for the polygon type here, we can go with n-gons or whatever, but you know, grid is always a pretty solid idea because it's going to get you some sort of a reasonable polygon distribution going, just so that doesn't become a problem at any point. Okay, but n-gons tend to work just fine as well. Okay, so with this done, I'm going to hit Control A on my keyboard. That's Command A if you're on Mac, to select all of the polygons, and then I'm just going to reverse them because right now they're pointing inwards. We want them pointing outwards. Okay, so we're just going to reverse the normals, Okay. And then, well, then what we can do here is we should select the juice and the glass object. Okay, we're going to go into the side view. We're going to solo everything as well. We're going to go into the side view then. We're going to select the juice object, and we're going to want to center its axis. And you can do that by hitting Shift-C on your keyboard. It's going to bring up the commander. And if you just type in axis center, you're going to get this tool here. You double click on it. And with it, you can just simply, center that axis to the center of the object. So with that done, the only thing remaining to do here is to just make this thing a little bit bigger. So the juice mesh, we want it to be a little bit bigger. So we're just going to scale it up on all three axes, just so it protrudes through the inner part of that glass. Okay, that's a pretty important step right there. Now, if you take a look at our rendered image, this is really not looking that cool. That is because we have a bit of a shading issue, and it's very specific to the glass model that we're working with here, or rather the juice model that we're working here. We have this normal tag here, and sometimes this thing can get in the way. So you can just delete it. And if you do that, you might also have to unhide the object then, just for it to properly refresh. And when you do that, look at that, you get a much more pleasing result. And just to make this super clear, okay, that normal tag doesn't always get in the way, but with certain models it can. And in our case here, it did. So that's why we demonstrated this workflow. If we ever see weird shading like that, just remember to remove that normal tag, okay? Now, at this point, really, the only thing we have to do still is to just bring in the juice material. We can create one from scratch, obviously. But then what we can also do here is we can just leverage the Cosmos library. So we're going to open up the Cosmos browser. We're going to search for orange juice. As you can see, we already did that because we pre-rehearsed this video. And then we're going to select the orange juice material that we like. We're going to import it. Okay. And then we can just apply that material to our object, to our juice object. And there you go. You have juice in your glass. All right, and with that, we're concluding this tutorial. We hope you've learned something new, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.